throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry. Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. Coming at you on a Friday night, back to our normal night recording. And we have to bring you an edition of the podcast here this week because that's right, Carolina getting ready to begin spring practice, and they will do it with a film crew possibly already on campus. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. We have questions for each and every room that Carolina has going into fall camp or spring practice, rather, not fall camp. Wish it was fall camp, but we'll go through those questions, tell you what we think ultimately the answers are for those questions, but really just some intriguing things that you can look at or at least look for from the media updating you, because it looks like things are going to be pretty closed off. We'll also briefly touch on the spring game bonanza that's going on in terms of teams just canceling their spring games. It looks like they're not going to be hosting them, and I would expect that Carolina will probably fall in line with what the rest of the country is doing. So we'll tell you whether or not we like that trend or if we're disappointed by that, especially with Bill Belichick being in Chapel Hill for this first season. And then at the end, I will tell you a little bit about a commitment that Carolina landed, and also we'll update what's going on at the NFL Scouting Combine. Bryson Nesbitt just finished up his on-field drills with the tight ends about 30 minutes ago. So I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on out there. But the big news of the day is what we have to start with here, which is that the Tar Heels are set to be on the off-season version of Hard Knocks. And you may be wondering, why in the world is a college football team going to be on this year's edition of Hard Knocks? Wouldn't it be an NFL team? Well, as I can tell you firsthand, the reason why it's not going to happen is because of the franchise that I root for at the NFL level. The New York Giants pretty much set the precedent that you don't want off-season Hard Knocks to ever be in your building, because they film everything. They put everything that is said pretty much on to the final cut. And unfortunately, I think the Giants were caught off guard by the fact that they showed as much as they did when it came to the Saquon Barkley situation, and when it came to how brutally honest they were about quarterback Daniel Jones. And I think that is ultimately what has led the rest of the NFL to say, yeah, we're good. We're not going to take that on. And so instead, they are deciding that they're going to follow a former NFL great head coach, a guy that is destined for the Hall of Fame someday soon, but now a guy that is at the college football level in Bill Belichick, and they will follow him building this Tar Heel roster over the offseason. Now, as of right now, I don't think that they have begun filming. Jonathan Jones said that there is still some things that have to be ironed out. Of course, Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports, he has sources in Chapel Hill. So one would think that at the start of spring practice, maybe that's when they get on campus and get, start getting some of the filming that they need done. But it could be the middle of spring practice. What we know is that more than likely they're going to want to be there for the transfer portal. That'll be the more interesting thing. So, I mean, here's the big question when it comes to this. Are we a fan of this or not? Because I think there's arguments to be made for both sides. What do you say, Josh Marlowe, when you get asked the question whether or not you're a fan of Hard Knocks being on campus?
Yeah, I don't see how you could be not a fan of this. It's more exposure for your program. It's really a chance for Bill Belichick to continue to sell himself at the college level. Because, a guy like Jonathan Jones was writing hit pieces in the offseason about him potentially still looking to leave to go to the NFL because he didn't sign a contract, even though that was a common practice among coaches. We saw that with Hubert Davis and his extension getting officially made public this week. Something that was agreed upon last July was not signed until December. So I'm a fan of it, man. Like, it's more exposure for Carolina. It's a chance for them to show themselves off to, the current college football world, the future college football world, and just another way for Bill Belichick to really kind of ingrain himself in the college game and really get his message, his model, his philosophy out there as he looks to adapt to a different game. So, it gives us content to talk about in the offseason as well, which is something as content creators we love when we have something easy to react to and to talk about. But, when the NFL cannot find another suitable franchise to go through with the offseason version of Hard Knocks, they think outside the box, they go to Chapel Hill and to follow Bill Belichick. I think this is a no-brainer because this is a win-win for everybody involved.
Yeah, I think, you would hope that it would be a win-win for everybody involved. I think that from a fan perspective and especially for us content creators, we love it. We think it's the best thing that could possibly happen because we're going to have more content in the off season. It will be something that we will be able to talk about every week when it comes out. We will watch the episodes. We will get the clips from the episodes, and we will be on here talking to you guys about what we saw in this week's edition of Hard Knocks. For that reason, I think it's tremendous. I love everything about it. From the fans' perspective, you're going to see the transition right in front of your face from Mack Brown to Bill Belichick. You're going to see how guys are going to handle that. We can get the insight into exactly what, Mack Brown's practices were like. It was really hard. They started limiting a lot of the media, especially after COVID. But I will say that there were certain aspects of practice that I think we know Mack Brown was not really that big of a stickler on, one of them being tackling. I think this will show you that Bill Belichick and his staff are going to take a much, much different approach. And I think it's the thing that you're really going to be interested to see is when they say that they're taking the professional approach to the game. I think it's going to be interesting to watch this version of Hard Knocks in the offseason, which you would imagine is technically the offseason, but they're still going to show a lot of spring ball, which means you're basically going to get a look at training camp as it would be at the NFL level. I think that'll be really cool insight into what the program looks like. And you'll be able to compare it to some of the previous Hard Knocks stuff that we've seen from the NFL level and see, does it really line up? Are they bringing the professional game to the college game? And are there things that they're maybe tweaking and adjusting just a little bit to fit this college game? That's going to be really cool to see. I think the pushback that some would have is that it is going to add more pressure, because this is something that would not have happened with any other coach that you would have hired. It wouldn't have happened if Mac Brown would have stayed. They would not have been bringing Hard Knocks to the college level. It just wouldn't have happened. They're doing it because Bill Belichick is here. And when it comes to the pressure, you may say, look, man, Belichick's not afraid of it. He's not. His staff's not. The kids on this roster, that's going to be a huge adjustment for them. Still, I think if you want to play for Bill Belichick, this is part of it. This is what you have to deal with. So I think all across the board, this is a pretty big success. This will be a pretty big success. And I think this is a really good move for Carolina. It doesn't shock me either. I think this was something that they were probably pushing for once they realized that a lot of teams around the NFL were not big fans of it. I don't doubt in the slightest, not even Bill Belichick. This screams Michael Lombardi to me. I feel like this is something that he wants to do as the general manager. And I think the one thing that it really does more than anything is it shows off the program. It's going to show the mindset of Bill Belichick, and it's really going to give recruits a look at what life is like being coached by the greatest coach of all time at any level of football. That is going to be the thing that I think is really going to be taken away from this, is what do the recruits see? How do they react to this? That's something that'll be interesting to monitor in, the summer and throughout. That'll be right around the time the guys are taking official visits too. So there'll be something that maybe other teams can't really show them that Carolina will be able to show them. So all in all, I think it is a relatively big win. What do you think about the recruiting angle of it? Do you think that's something that potentially played into the decision for Carolina to allow those cameras on campus?
Probably the biggest driving force, because there's so many questions about how will Bill Belichick, respond to having to recruit, and how would he adapt? I think he's adapted pretty well. Everywhere he went in January, there seemed to be a nice reception, a nice following with his presence. But now this just makes it easier. This just now makes your program that much more accessible. And you got to remember, in this day and age of Hard Knocks, teams have control of what goes out. Like, everyone can get mad about the Giants and what happened with them last year. What was made public was what they wanted to be made public. So you got to be mad at them for what was made public about the Saquon stuff, because they allowed all that stuff to go out there. So whatever comes out of Carolina's program is going to be what Carolina wants to be put out there. So don't make it like it's going to be, there's going to be some propaganda that is involved, but this is another way for them to get their message out there to the best high school recruits locally, the best high school recruits nationally, and then as well with the transfer portal, which is the name of the game right now. So, I think it's why it's a win-win for everyone involved, and for the people that are worried that this might overwhelm these kids. If that's something that happens, then we've got more ridding of the roster we got to get done. And there's some more kids we got to get out of the program, because it should be, it's a privilege to play for Bill Belichick. And with that privilege comes the pressure, and either you're tough enough to handle it and you embrace it, or you'll cower under it and you won't be good enough. So I think with all this involved, it's just going to enhance everything from the program off the field that you hope results in more wins on it.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why some people may be concerned about it really is just, Carolina, when they've done these things in the past, it hasn't worked out. That's the name of the game for Carolina football, is that it's been a disaster when they have tried to do things like this. Those are the seasons where Carolina has struggled the most. So hopefully, that things turn. I think that's just part of what you have to believe in with the Bill Belichick culture is that things are going to look different. So I think it really is moving Carolina into the new age of Carolina football. And so to me, I'm all for it. I think it's going to be a great look at the program. I'm going to be really interested to check it out. We'll see how much control Carolina has. I am one that did not believe that the Giants had as much control as they thought they did. I think going in when they first agreed to it, they thought that they could control pretty much everything that was said and done. I find it hard to believe that they would have wanted as much out with the Saquon stuff, not even really the Saquon stuff, more so the Daniel Jones stuff, especially once they, once it was known that they were going to end up having to keep him. I found it hard to believe that the Giants said, oh, you know what? We want as much released as possible. We're basically begging for anybody but Daniel Jones to be our quarterback. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a motivational technique. I think things will be a little bit different, though, too, with how they handle the college guys. I brought this up today when I first saw this news. I highly doubt they are going to show guys that are told to enter the transfer portal, which is basically cuts, because they show that when it comes to the NFL level. They'll show guys getting cut because that's just part of it. Those are professionals. These are technically amateurs, although they are guys that are paid at this point through NIL. I still think they're going to keep that amateur status, and I would be stunned if they show guys that are being told, if there are guys that are being told by this staff that you're simply not good enough to stay here and play with us this season. We need you off the roster to clear up roster spots. I don't think they're going to show that. So that would be the one other pushback that you would probably have. I highly doubt that they're going to get that deep into the process. It's going to be more about trying to figure out what they're going to do, in the transfer portal, how they go about recruiting those types of guys, recruiting itself, and then some of the on-field stuff that you're going to see as they try to develop this team into a winner in year one. Well, camp starts Tuesday. And so the best way for us to look at this roster and where it is at right now, I think, is by talking about the biggest questions that Carolina has at each and every position, because I think every position room you can come up with a legitimate question for. So we're going to go position room by position room. We'll do offense first, then we'll do defense, and then special teams. And let you guys in the comments, let us know what you think about these questions, what you think the ultimate answer is going to be for them. And let's start with the quarterback spot, because I think this is probably, once again, the most intriguing spot, because Carolina for a second straight year is going to have a quarterback battle. This one, I feel like, is going to be a little bit different than last year's, though. Not to say that last year's didn't have legitimate guys, but remember that the guy that eventually takes over the starting job and does the best job for Carolina in that role was a guy that came in the summer transfer window. It wasn't even a guy that was on the roster in the spring. And so this group, I think, is going to be a lot different. Highly doubt Carolina is going to add a quarterback that's going to compete to potentially win the job in the summer. I think you're dealing with the group that you've got here. And so that means right now it's going to be up to two young guys. It's going to be the redshirt freshman Ryan Brown, who transfers in from Purdue, and it's going to be the true freshman Bryce Baker, who Carolina was able to hold on to after he originally committed to Mack Brown. He ended up signing with Carolina and enrolling. And so he is one of the few guys in this freshman class that is going to be on campus already. So I think the most intriguing question is just, what do the young quarterbacks do? And is anybody able to sort of create a little separation for themselves after the spring?
Yeah, I think it's going to be – I think in my mind, I think you'd want to exit the spring knowing who your quarterback's going to be. I feel like the staff, with the way that they pursued Bryce Baker, how important he was. Remember when we got when Bill Belichick got introduced at the basketball game against, it was either Georgia Tech or LaSalle. Remember, he walked on the court and took Bryce Baker with him. Like, yeah, they were a package deal that you got introduced to, something you quite frankly just have never seen before, which kind of tells you how Bill Belichick feels about him as well. So, right, the position is younger, but you've got a uber talented guy in Bryce Baker, and then you got the transfer in from Ryan Brown. I think it's just going to be which one could potentially get a head start, because I think we'd feel a lot more comfortable about this team's chances to compete and win 8-9 games if they go into fall camp knowing who their quarterback is going to be. If you can show up at the end of July, early August, and you know from that moment on who your quarterback's going to be, I think it could really bode well to the type of season that Carolina ends up having, as opposed to maybe trying to work your way through it all the way through fall camp. So it's going to be exciting to see how that position groups unfolds. With the importance of Bryce Baker and the recruiting standpoint, I think Carolina fans will want him to win the job, and we'll see what he's made up of, what he's got coming in as that 4-star prospect, because he'll be battling with a redshirt freshman quarterback transfer from Purdue that's going to be out to prove he belongs to play for a guy of the caliber of Bill Belichick.
Well, and a guy that has a little bit of an experience edge, did start 2 games last year for Purdue, which, I mean, look, that's about as bad of an experience as you can possibly get, but it's still experience. And he did some good things when he was in there. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, does that experience really matter at all when they get into spring practice, or does it not matter at all? Does it really just fall into talent? And we know who has the talent advantage out of the two of those guys. Ryan Brown is certainly a guy that I think is more talented than people probably realize. But when you're talking about a guy in Bryce Baker that continued to rise and rise, you're talking about a guy that is very similar to what we saw from Sam Howell. I mean, his final ranking finished up very similarly to his. So could he be a guy that does the exact same thing that we see from Sam back in his freshman year, and he comes out and starts the first game of the season? I think he's got the arm talent to do it. But, yeah, it's going to be a stiff competition between him and Brown. And then who knows? We have to wait and see ultimately what happens with Max Johnson. I don't know if Max Johnson's going to play this year. There has not been really any clarification on his injury and whether or not he's progressing to that point. I know that he, someone that is one of my friends on social media sent me a message the other day, said they saw him walking around campus and looked pretty good. I don't believe he's in a walking boot or anything still. So that is a good sign, but how quickly is he going to be able to return to the football field and be competitive, I think, is the question. Now, I mean, really quickly, when it comes to Max Johnson, do you think that he should even be considered as a part of the quarterback battle this year or no?
I feel bad saying no, given the fact that he suffered the injury that he suffered. The guy that brought him in is no longer the head coach, and he stayed with the program, but I just don't know how much he has to offer at this point. That injury was gruesome. And let's be frank, before he got injured, it wasn't good quarterback play to begin with anyway. How much of that was his fault? No idea. But for the way that he was talked about and the fact that that's the guy that Mac Brown went with to begin last year anyway, is quite puzzling, because the way that Jacoby Criswell played, you would have thought that, he would have maybe won the starting job over a guy like Max Johnson. I love his leadership. I think that could be a great asset to a young quarterback room, but I don't think he should factor into what goes on onto the field this year for Carolina.
I think it really all just depends. If this group can really separate themselves, can show that both guys potentially, or at least one guy, is a legitimate option, then I think you roll with them. They're younger. They're the future of this program. I think that's what you have to do. But if both guys struggle, I think the door should be open for a guy like Max Johnson to step in there. I know it wasn't great in the game against Minnesota, but again, that was, not even 3 full quarters against Minnesota before he ends up getting injured. So, I mean, that's a short period of time. It didn't look great, but neither did Connor Harrell really when he entered that game. So who knows? Who knows what he ends up looking like with a little more time to prepare, especially if he's the guy that they roll with. Let's say if both guys really struggle that bad in the spring and they decide, you know what, we're going with the experience of Max Johnson. He's healthy. If they spend the entire fall sort of getting him ready for that opening game against TCU, he might end up actually being an option. I'm probably a little more open to it. But I think that's definitely going to be a wait and see. All right, you go to the running back room. Big question here. I mean, I think people are wondering about Davian Goss. I'm really not. I think he's a guy that can handle taking over that starting role, no issue. Doesn't mean that he's going to be as good as Omarion Hampton, but I do think that he has shown you in the limited snaps that he took last year that he is a more than capable back. The biggest question to me is who steps up behind him, because you've got a veteran in Caleb Hood who has been there a while, but he's been so injury prone. Is he even going to be available to step up there for Carolina? And if he doesn't, then you get to a group of guys that are really just a complete unknown. Charleston French was on the roster last year, but that's a guy that comes from the JUCO level. And then you've got a bunch of freshmen that Carolina added at the running back position. The only one that's going to be here in the spring is Jarrell Cobb. Is he a guy that can potentially factor in for Carolina? I think it's important for them to figure out some answers here depth-wise. And so the biggest question is who ends up stepping up behind the starting running back, Davian Goss?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice for Caleb Hood to, A, be able to stay healthy, and then B, be the guy that Mack Brown had talked about in previous off seasons as a guy that could be a productive member of the backfield, because, with how inexperienced Carolina is going to be at quarterback, you would like to be able to establish a running game early to take some pressure off of those guys' shoulders in the early part of the year until they get comfortable, get confident, and more importantly, find some rhythm and some chemistry with that wide receiver room. And so I think Davian Goss is a guy that's going to be a candidate to maybe have a breakout year, rush for 800-plus yards, and be the next really good back to come through the program. But you got to have more than just him. You got to have another horse or two to really help you navigate through the season. There's not a lack of talent in the room, but you just got to figure out, what that depth chart's going to look like, how you're going to divvy up, snaps and stuff like that. If this offense is anything like what you saw from NFL offense under Bill Belichick, he had no problem using different types of backs for different type of roles and being able to get the most out of a 2-3 three-man backfield. Does he bring that same approach to the college level? It remains to be seen, but they're going to need to have at least a clear number two to really make sure they don't wear down Davian Goss the way you saw Omarion Hampton get worn down a few years ago.
And the thing is I think if Caleb Hood stays healthy, he's capable of doing it. I mean, you go back to that 2022 season where Carolina was searching for answers at running back. And I mean, he carried the ball 43 times for 250 yards. That's an average of 5.8 yards per carry, and caught the ball well. 13 catches for 119 yards and a touchdown. I think the most important thing for him is that health, that health issue that has just been plaguing him his entire career. Every time that it seems like he is going to start to at least become a factor, he always has something that he has to deal with. Hopefully he can have a healthy spring. And, by the fall, maybe he's proving that he is that solid number two behind Davian Goss. Because, I think Goss is capable of handling the type of load that we saw last year from Omarion Hampton. But the thing is we don't know how effective he's going to be. And that's asking a lot of a running back, especially in this day and age, and especially with how much we expect that Bill Belichick and his staff are going to want to run the ball. I think that's going to be a bigger part of their game plan than it even was the last couple of years for Carolina, which is really saying something because this past year, I thought Chip Lindsey did a really good job of leaning on Amari and Hampton and running the football at certain points in the year. I think the focus is going to be a run-first team that really just bullies you as the game goes along. And that's why they need that second running back. So we'll see if that guy can possibly emerge. The wide receiver room. The biggest question here is, what does this room actually look like? Because right now we have no idea what it actually looks like. What I mean by that is we are still waiting on whether or not the appeal from J.J. Jones allows him to come back and play another season in Chapel Hill. If it does, Carolina gets their leading receiver back. That would be huge. If not, Carolina then has some questions that arise from that, especially when it comes to a guy in Kobe Paysour who is returning to the roster and can play either in the slot or on the outside. So I think that's going to be the most interesting thing. I talked to JJ earlier this week. He told me that this weekend is when that decision is going to officially come down. So when I get that news, I'll let you guys know. If he does end up coming back, Carolina could return everybody but the starting slot receiver in Nate McCollum, which I think would be important, but it would limit guys like Chris Culliver and Christian Hamilton from taking that next step. So I think figuring out what this room looks like is the first important step for Carolina before they even hit the practice fields for the spring.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if he's back, and it'd be a big get for Carolina, then as you mentioned, some guys are not going to be. You still need them to step up, but their level of responsibility maybe will not be as high. They won't be asked as much as if he's no longer back. I know we tweeted out the video. I think it was sometime last week, about a minute or so long, of a bunch of his highlights. Yep. So maybe he has a feeling of where this decision is ultimately going to go. Maybe he was just tweeting out his highlights because that's what kids do these days. You just don't really know. But, there was a lot of speculation around that video about that maybe being a sign to him saying, without officially saying, hey, I'm going to be back next year. So, again, this room, a lot like the running back room, there's talent here. You just got to figure out, okay, who do you have officially back and who you don't? And then because if he's not back, then, yeah, you got to start demanding more from a Chris Culliver. You got to start demanding more from a Christian Hamilton. Two guys who I think are equipped to take steps forward, guys that I think are equipped to be difference makers at the ACC level this year. But if J.J. Jones is back, you'll still need production from those guys, but nowhere near as much as if you get a guy that, as you mentioned, is Carolina's returning receiver. We know what Kobe Paysour is capable of doing when he's healthy. So you just got to really hope and pray he can stay healthy again this year to be the explosive playmaker he's been in the previous years at Carolina. So, we'll get that news, as you said, this weekend. And hopefully we'll go into camp with a clear idea of what we have at wide receiver and what we need to come out of spring camp in terms of knowing what that starting rotation will be going into the fall.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest. If they get J.J. Jones back, what I would do personally is I would move Kobe Paysour back into the slot. I thought that was where he was at his best. You will remember back in 2022, comes in, plays in the slot for Carolina when Josh Downs is on the shelf with an injury, looks absolutely fantastic in that role. The first 6 games that he played for Carolina, he was their leading receiver in those games that he started. That's something that I think is still there. You just have to unlock it. And by putting him back in the slot, I think that would work. That would also mean that you could open up that other outside receiver role for a guy in Chris Culliver. And I like what we saw from Christian Hamilton. I understand that he got banged up last year, and that was unfortunate for him. I think Culliver's the more explosive of the two. There's a reason I compared him to De'Ami Brown when he came out of the high school ranks. I think that's there for him. And I think now he's a guy that's motivated by the way that he finished last season. And I think he is really one of the guys most excited to play for Bill Belichick. I think that's the guy that you're hoping sort of breaks out this year. So I think that I'd love to see him playing alongside J.J. Jones and Kobe Paysour playing in that slot. If that Carolina could put together that receiving core, I feel really confident about that group. And that doesn't even speak to other guys like Jordan Shipp and some of the other young guys that Carolina has on the roster, Alex Taylor, guys like that, who I think could be big contributors as well at some point in their career, and could be, guys that rotate in this year. So that room, really excited about it. Would love to get J.J. Jones back to give Carolina a little bit more experience there. Something that Carolina wishes they had in their tight end room, because right now they just don't have that. I think the biggest question here is who takes the reins at the tight end position, because right now there are no proven commodities. It is a bunch of young, talented guys with upside that are hoping that they can become the face of that room. Bryson Nesbitt, as I mentioned, worked out tonight at the Combine. John Copenhaver graduated. I thought he might get some NFL looks with how good of a blocker he was towards the end of his career and the promise that he had as a receiver, but he doesn't. Doesn't matter. Carolina's still got to move on and now find that next tight end that can succeed for them as an inline tight end, and they got to find somebody who can step up as a receiver as well. So really it's about sifting through the group of guys that you have and figuring out who can step up.
Yep, and I think that's going to be something where we're going to need to be patient with that group. I think that's where you're trusting the coaching that's going to be put on the field to really, like, that's a position group that I think we're going to monitor from spring ball to fall camp to the end of September, October, November, as one that gets better as the season moves along. But when you look at it from the spring, it's just trying to find guys that can step up and be difference makers right away, whether that's just as guys that help in pass protection or emerging as a nice safety valve for one or your two young starting quarterbacks. And so, this is a room that the past couple years was blessed with some talent and some depth, and all that's kind of gone because these guys have either turned pro, graduated, and exhausted all of their eligibility. And so we've seen how important tight ends can be in Bill Belichick offenses in the past. They were at one point the forefront of the more explosive Patriot offenses with Tom Brady and the gang in the 2010s. But they also were guys that were really good in the run game. And so I think Carolina will look for a difference maker at both blocking tight end and then receiving tight end. It's just a matter of someone stepping up, taking the bull by the horn and saying, this is my role. This is who I'm going to be. And this is how I'm going to help my team by doing my job every time I take the field.
Yeah, and Jake Johnson, I think, is the guy that you would expect out of that group to step up, the brother of Max Johnson, and a guy that did, have some production in his time at Texas A&M. I think that's the guy that you're looking at right now, but he really didn't do much this past year for Carolina. And when he got in there towards the end of the year, he showed you that he is a little bit limited as a blocker. Hopefully that's the guy that emerges as the receiving tight end. But then, it's finding that blocking tight end. You're right. Out of the guys that Carolina has, there's not a lot of guys that really fit that profile. They're hoping that, I think, Connor Cox is that guy, the transfer from South Carolina. I mean, it's 6'6", 250 pounds. I think that's the guy that they're certainly looking at. You could also look at Julian Randolph, who's 6'5", 245 pounds. Biggest thing for Randolph, you're hoping that he stays healthy. But blocking wasn't really a strength of his coming out of the high school level. So I think that's the biggest question, is finding guys that can block consistently for Carolina. Last year we heard Freddie Kitchens said, if you can't block, then you're not going to play. I think that is what he is going to expect from this group. And we saw with Bryson Nesbitt, as long as the effort is there, that's what he's looking for. You don't have to be the greatest blocking tight end that we've ever seen to be out there and playing for him, but he just wants to see the effort. Hopefully Carolina can get that from this group. You move on to the offensive line, and really the question there is simple, is How do you balance the transfers and the incumbents here along the offensive line? I think there's one guy that's got a starting job locked up. I think that's Austin Blaske. I think everybody else is fighting for their job. Having Blaske return at center is huge. That means the world for Carolina, because I think ultimately, having that guy in the middle that can control everything and is as good of a leader as Blaske is definitely helpful, and he's coming off a pretty good year. The other two guys, look, I thought Aiden Banfield, for a true freshman, did some really good things, but there were, some times last year where he struggled. Trevion Green really, really struggled at right tackle. I don't think he's going to be playing out there with this new staff. I think there's a chance he's moved inside to guard. But then you bring in 5 transfers along the offensive line. 4 of them are listed as tackles, but there are some guys that are movable that can play inside as well. I think that's the biggest question here, is how do you balance those guys who you guys went out and got in the portal and the guys that are returning from the roster last year that are hoping to make a name for themselves with the new staff?
I'm with you. I think Blaske's the one that you would say today is a starter. Like you, I liked what I saw for the majority of the season last year from Aiden Banfield, but there's no denying that when Bill Belichick got hired and he put Michael Lombardi in place as a general manager and they started evaluating this roster, you don't go out and bring in 5 transfer offensive linemen on accident. You just don't. That was an area that, and it's not a surprise. We've seen that offensive line the past couple years. It was a group that could play at a really high level, but it was never consistent and it was never in the big moments. But it's not a coincidence that that's they go in and they upgraded, or they at least tried to upgrade that position at the bare minimum, add some more competitive talent and depth to that position group to really push the guys that are left over from the from what Mack Brown had recruited and the guys that stayed within the program. And so, we talked about it back during the transfer portal, how he was bringing in guys, as you mentioned, that 4 of them are listed as tackles, but they could play inside if they have to. You added some more flexibility along your offensive line, which I think is something that'll be key. You never feel like you really have that with Mack Brown and the offensive lines that we watched over the last handful of years. But that's going to be a position that's going to be really interesting to see, because there's some talent that's left over from what remained within the program. But the fact that Bill Belichick went out and brought in 5 transfer offensive linemen tells me that he did not like what he saw from the guys that were left over when he went through that tape, and he's motivated to find a better starting offensive line than what we saw last year at times for Carolina.
Well, and you lost, 2 of the guys that were starters along your offensive front. Willie Lampkin is a huge loss that you were going to have to replace no matter what. And then Howard Sampson leaves at left tackle. I think that could ultimately be an upgrade for Carolina, depending on who their guy is. I think it should be Chad Lindbergh, the transfer from Rice, but it could also be a guy in Daniel King, who actually will not be with the team in the spring. They're only going to have 4 of the guys that are transferring in with them in the spring. Daniel King, the transfer from Troy, will come in with the rest of the freshmen and join the team in the summer. Still, I think he's a guy that, because of the history that he has playing the position, he could be a guy that comes in, slots in at one of those spots, especially if nobody really steps up there in the spring. But I do think that Carolina's offensive line, there is a lot of promise there with some of the transfers that are being brought in. And I still like, some of the guys that are incumbents. I still think that Trevion Green, if he makes the move inside to right guard, I think there is potential there. Really like what we saw from Banfield. I think he's going to fight to potentially hold on to that starting job. But you're right. There's a reason they went out and got these guys. These guys aren't just coming here to sit behind, guys that were here last year and provide depth. They're here to fight for starting jobs. And I think that some of them, if not most of them, will end up winning those starting jobs. You move over to the other side of the trenches. And the biggest question here, there are so many that you could go with, because Carolina brings in a couple of transfer edge rushers. That's a position that they need to be better. They end up bringing in CJ Mims at the defensive tackle spot. What's he going to bring to the table? The biggest question, though, is who emerges from the young group of defensive tackles next to Mims, because you've got Joel Starlings, Rodney Laura, guys who played in the bowl game, didn't really shine, need to step up. And then you've got guys like Peter Pasansky, who was a freshman last year, Leroy Jackson coming in. And then, some of the guys that Carolina added as true freshmen this year, even some of the late additions, they'll have to wait until the summer. But is there anybody that steps up next to CJ Mims, or is this a position that Carolina is going to have to go out and get someone in that spring transfer window?
Yeah, I just want to know, are we going to have a pulse up front on that defensive line? Or is it going to be more of the same, and when we're seeing this group just get manhandled and not be able to make a difference? And so, I think it's been interesting to see, because I do think there's talent here. Is this a position group that, because of Bill Belichick and the staff that he's put together, do they get more out of it? Can you get more production? Can you get more consistency from a group that last year would flash in some games and would be non-existent in others? And then you've got a nice blend, I think, of guys that are holdovers from what Mack Brown had recruited. You added some guys yourself late on the class that'll join the team in the summer, and then you went and brought in some transfer guys as well. So you've got a plethora of guys to identify difference makers and identify playmakers. I think what you're going to look to find in the spring is, can you get a consistent rotation of guys that you can count on every single game? Or is it going to be what you dealt like with under Mack Brown, where a guy would show up like Jabari Ritzie and have 5 sacks in the first 2 games and then go on a milk carton for the next 2 months? I think that's going to be something that Bill Belichick and his staff are going to be motivated to find. And again, like the offensive line, I don't think it's a coincidence they went and added some dudes out of the portal. I don't think it's a coincidence they went and added dudes late in that recruiting class, because they understand the name of the game is winning up front. You got to have a handful of bodies, but more importantly, you got a handful of bodies that have provided consistent production. That has not been the case for Carolina the last handful of years.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think from an edge rusher standpoint, when you've got guys like Price Yates, Bo Atkinson, Milcart, Abu Jowdy, I do think that those are guys that you believe in. But
yeah, you feel confident on the edge, just the guys on the interior.
That's the thing. And like I said, you got one guy. You got one guy that's had any sort of experience, and that's CJ Mims. And I mean, look, he was solid for East Carolina. He wasn't great. And so that means that you need somebody to step up. I'm looking at Laura and Starlings. Those are the 2 main guys, and especially Starlings. I mean, dude, you're a guy that's 320 pounds at 6'4". That's the type of size that you need in the middle of this defense. But, I mean, look, if those guys don't step up, there's opportunities for a Leroy Jackson, for a Pasansky, even for a guy, like Terry Nwabusi Isaiela, who is going to join the team here for spring practice as a true freshman. I mean, 6'2", 320 pounds. Hey, there might be an opportunity for you. Ultimately, I think they will go and get somebody at that position, but this is your opportunity, if you are these guys, to show them that, okay, you may still need to go and get somebody for depth purposes. You don't have to go out and find another starter, because we are capable of doing that. Hopefully one of these guys can show that. Move on to the linebackers here real quickly. How much do you actually rotate here? That's the biggest question for me, because we've heard it the last few years. I know that you've got some really good talent. You like the combination of Amari Campbell paired alongside of Kamori House. But how much does Carolina actually rotate? Because I think that's going to be important, trying to keep this group fresh. This is an NFL, a professional style that this group of coaches is bringing, that this front office is bringing. We've heard the 33rd team stuff. Well, here's the thing. At the NFL level, they rotate linebackers to try to keep guys fresh. Are you going to do the same thing here with this linebacking core?
Yeah, because I think you're in the same situation you've been the last couple years, right? Where you feel really good about your top two. You feel really good about Amari Campbell, and we know the transfer, really highly thought of as a guy that's going to be a difference maker. We felt really good about, when you had Cedric Gray and Powell Echols, but you had nothing behind those guys because the guys behind them just never played, so they were never ready to play. But by late October, early November, Gray, Echols, whoever, these guys are worn down. They're not being the same impact players that they were at the beginning of the season. I think Bill Belichick is going to be mindful of that. And this is where I think just some common sense really comes into play. You at the college level, man, where you're playing 80-plus snaps week in, week out, you can't ask these dudes to be on the field as much as these guys were on the field the last couple of years. At the NFL level, you're right. You rotate players. In the NFL, you typically play maybe 60, 65 snaps a game. It's very rare you play the amount of snaps at the NFL level that you do at the college level, but you still see that rotation being a big part of what Carolina wants to do. Their top two is really good, but you got to have, I would say, you got to have at least 4 linebackers that you're comfortable with being on the field, that if you give Campbell or I'll say a drive off or hell even a playoff, you're not going to get killed. And so I think that'll be something that'll be intentional from this staff, where they make it known that we're not just going to talk about rotating. We're actually going to rotate to keep our guys, A, more fresh, but B, build the type of depth you got to have to win at the level Carolina wants to eventually win at.
Yeah, and I think a guy like Michael Short is capable of doing that. It's just how much do they actually end up playing him this season. We move on to the defensive backs. To me, again, you could ask a bunch of different questions here, especially with corner. I mean, I think all of us are incredibly excited to see, what does the cornerback spots look like? Is Marcus Allen a guy that's locked in as a starter? I think we know that Thaddeus Dixon, the transfer from Washington, is going to be one of the starters. But if, Marcus Allen continues to be inconsistent, is there somebody else that steps up? Does Ty Adams returning, is he the guy that could be the future of that room for Carolina that steps up and maybe pushes Marcus Allen? But the biggest question is at safety, because Carolina has a group of holdovers from the Mack Brown era that are trying to win those jobs, guys like Will Hardy, and then you've got the guys that were true freshmen this past year, Malcolm Ziegler, Jaden Patterson, Jalen Thompson. Those are guys that are going to be battling to potentially take over those jobs, but they'll be battling with some of the transfers. Coleman Bryson, the transfer from Minnesota, who was, a guy that was a rotational piece for the Golden Gophers this past year. He wants to be a starter this year at Carolina and has the talent to be able to do it. And Peyton Waters, a guy that was extremely talented coming into Washington, didn't play a ton last year, but wants to play more this year. Who emerges from that group to be the starting safeties, and which one of those two do you think has a little bit more of the advantage going in? Is my question.
Yeah, I think, when you look at the cornerback spot, you look at Dixon, you feel comfortable and confident that his side of the field is going to be taken care of. Kind of how you felt with, Elijah Hussey or someone else at different points in time. It's the other guy. Remember, I was really high on Marcus Allen a year ago, and that guy was barbecue chicken all season long. He was not good. But maybe a new coaching staff, better coaching staff, you get the more out of a guy that I do think can be a physical corner and really be a difference maker for Carolina's defense. The secondary stuff is you're very green, you're very inexperienced, and I think what Carolina's looking for there is just consistency. Can a Malcolm Ziegler, can a Will Hardy, can these guys just provide this defense with the ability to just not make game-changing mistakes? Can they make the tackles in the open field that they got to make? Can they come down in the run game and really help Carolina be better in that area? I think this is a group where there's potential there to where you can get better, consistent production than what you've got from the past couple years. Defenses have changed. 10, 15 years ago, you had to have a dynamic safety to be a real elite defense, or at least you had to feel that way. I don't think that's no longer the case, just because of how many hybrid guys you have out there on the field right now. But what you need to have are guys that can be difference makers in the running game while also holding up in pass protection. That's been something that Carolina has struggled with really since Butch Davis left, and we've become the defensive, the laughing stock of college football. But if they can just get consistency, and I think something you'll see is that, Bill Belichick will just simplify what he's asking these guys to do. And just if you be a do your job mentality, do the 1 or 2 things that you're asking these guys of, you might get more production out of a group that I think has more talent than we're willing to believe in. We just got to see it actually translate onto the field.
Well, you need guys that can help over the top because these corners, especially a guy like Marcus Allen,
they're going to get beat.
Yeah, there are times where they're going to get beat. And these past few years, I mean, these safeties are just completely out of position. They're nowhere near where they need to be. That's the thing that you hope gets cleaned up. Some of that sloppiness, because, we've heard the simplification every single time that Carolina hires a new defensive coordinator. The talk is we're going to simplify things. Well, it can't really get much more simple than, hey, we just need you to be able to rotate over the top and help out in coverage. That's something that Carolina needs to be more consistent from their safeties. And I think hopefully this year, that's where it starts. Last thing is special teams. I think it's very clear. Does anybody separate themselves at place kicker? Because you've got 3 guys that are going to be with you in the spring. They're adding a 4th guy potentially in Jaffer Murphy in the summer. Or actually 2 guys. That's right. I forgot about the true freshman Gaetano Bartholomew as well. He could enter the conversation if the group that's currently there right now is unable to figure it out. You got to get that kicker spot, nailed down by week 1. I think that might be just as important, if not even more important than your starting quarterback, because juggling kickers is a complete disaster. So hopefully Carolina can start to get some answers there here in the spring.
Yep. And I think this will be an area that Belichick and the staff, I think what they know is that they'll know the deficiencies that hurt Carolina in the past couple years, and really try to elevate the status. And to Mack Brown's credit, I thought he tried to, he made changes at special teams coordinator. He tried to get more consistency out of that group. It did not happen. But you look at that first game, your field goal kicker might determine whether you win that game or whether you lose that game.
Yep.
And that's not going to be the end all be all to your season, but that's a great tone setter for Bill Belichick coming out of the gate. You get a win at home over TCU. We talked about it when we went through the schedule. It could really propel them to a fast start and really build some momentum in year 1 under Bill Belichick and the staff. So I think if you could go into fall camp having an idea of who your kicker is going to be, and not have to juggle and rotate that as you go into fall camp, or heaven forbid as the season moves along, it's a bigger deal than what most people would believe in. You got to get better production out of the punting game, just being able to really kick the ball further. And it would be a step in the right direction. But I think this is going to be an area that Bill Belichick's going to emphasize and really try to get more consistent production out of, because he knows how important the special teams are, the field position game, and all that stuff is. And it's going to be something that you set that tone in the spring for it to carry over in a fall game, and then once the season actually gets underway.
Yeah, I mean, Liam Boyd, Lucas Osada, Adam Samaha will be the guys that will be competing for that job. Also, keep an eye out for Osada if the struggles at punter continue. He is a better punter, I thought, coming out of high school than he was a kicker. But still, I think he's a legitimate contender there for that starting kicking job. So all of that going to be incredibly important, especially with the fact that they do have their starting kick returner back, a very explosive Chris Culliver, and then punt returner. They'll have to figure that out, but there are a load of options, guys that did it at the high school level and were very successful that should be able to figure that out. All right, guys, we are running a little bit long here, so I'll make sure that I get through this pretty quick. As I mentioned, Carolina did land a commitment in the 2026 class. That would be 3-star interior offensive lineman Anthony Big U-Haul Hall. That is his nickname. Not sure if that was given to him or if he gave it to himself, but either way, that is a badass nickname. He committed to Carolina last week. He is the number 709 overall prospect in the class, which is now actually the top-rated guy in the class. As a lot of these other guys are starting to get ranked. You're starting to see guys like Marcellus Ryan, Justin Lewis, Jaden Jefferson, the guys that were rated in the 500s. They're sliding down into the 700s now. But Big U-Haul, definitely a guy that I think, at 709, pretty comfortable spot for him right now, and don't expect him to really move too much further down as we go throughout this process. He's the number 62 interior offensive lineman. He is the top-ranked player in the state of Massachusetts and is definitely a true offensive guard, but he surprises you with the athletic ability that he has at his size. I thought one of the things that stuck out the most to me when I watched him was his ability as a pull blocker. They used him a lot in that role, especially, for a guy that's that size, and especially at the high school level. You rarely see teams use pull blockers because they're afraid to do it because guys might be too slow. He is not. He opens up his hips real easy and shows a nice burst to get out in front of running backs. Strong run blocker altogether, and part of that is because of just how strong he is in the upper body. Just overpowers defensive linemen, drives them either straight back or straight into the ground for those pancake blocks that we all love to see on film. He also does a really good job of getting off his initial block, climbing to that second level. That's very important for offensive linemen. You want to see guys, especially offensive guards, that are able to get that initial chip, whether it's on a defensive tackle, defensive end, and then get to that second level and get a hat on a linebacker to open up a bigger play down the field. He does that consistently. His footwork, very solid, especially for an interior offensive lineman at the high school level, and it shows up with how good he pass protects. He does a really good job in pass protection for a guard. The biggest question for him is going to be the level of competition that he plays in at the state of Massachusetts, and that could lead to a little bit of a steep learning curve. But as we've seen with other linemen, that happens. It's going to take a little bit of time. I think he's going to be a guy that somewhere down the line is able to be a pretty decent contributor for Carolina because of just how violent he is, how good of a pull blocker he is, and how good he is in pass protection. All right, guys, we move on to the combine and the updates on what's going on with the Tar Heel prospects. As I mentioned, you already have pretty much everybody done. You've only got one guy that still has to go, and that is the best of the group. That is Omarion Hampton. He'll be in prime time tomorrow with the running backs, so make sure that you keep an eye on that. I believe their coverage starts at 1 o'clock tomorrow, and I'm not sure how they're doing it. I'm not sure if the quarterbacks are going to run first, wide receivers or running backs. Not sure exactly. But I do know that, Hampton is expected to do very, very well. And he's going to be one of the guys that they're going to talk about. So, we've watched the coverage the last few nights. They haven't really talked a lot about the guys from Carolina. This is one of those guys they're going to talk almost exclusively about. It's going to be him, Ashton Jeanty, and then maybe, there's another running back or two that they're focused on. But he is going to get a lot of the hype. So that'll be fun to see. In terms of the 40-yard dashes that we've seen run, only 2 guys have run the 40 so far out of the 5 that were eligible to run. Now, part of it, again, is injuries. You've got Kamen Rucker, of course, recovering from that severe leg injury that he suffered against NC State on the cheap shot. He, did end up bench pressing. That was one thing that I did notice, 27 reps at 225, I believe. They don't have it up here. I forget the exact number of pounds that they end up putting on there. But that's really, really good for him. I think shows the strength that he brings. Jahvaree Ritzie, another guy who didn't do any of the stuff on the field, but he did end up bench pressing with 26 reps at that 225 mark, I believe. So pretty solid for him. As I mentioned, 40-yard dash. You've had Power Echols run it, a 4.73. Bryson Nesbitt, an official 4.88, but that is an incredibly slow time. I thought he was going to be a guy that would run somewhere in the 4.6s. Maybe you could have convinced me that he would be in the 4.7s because he's put on some weight since he came out of high school. That is shocking. And, part of it may be because he was recovering from the wrist surgery. Not really sure, but that certainly is not a time that he's going to be happy with. Hopefully he can run better at his pro day. For Echols, solid, but, something that I think, you go back and you look at what he was in high school, much faster athlete, and just at the college level, I think Carolina wanted him to be a little bit heavier at the linebacker spot. So I believe that's part of the reason that he ran the way that he did. In terms of the vertical, actually Jahvaree Ritzie did do some of the on-field stuff. He just didn't do any of the televised portion of the on-field stuff. He actually did jump. Power Echols, the best jump of the group, 37 inches, which is really, really solid. 35.5 inches for Jahvaree Ritzie, 32.5 for Bryson Nesbitt. So maybe, I was looking into it. Maybe, I thought Nesbitt would be more explosive, and that's just really not there for him. Broad jump, Power Echols, 9'7". Ritzie, 9'6", and Nesbitt, 9'4". None of those really blow you away, but pretty solid number there for Power Echols, especially, and for Jahvaree Ritzie at the defensive tackle spot. In terms of some of the other drills, like the 3-cone, the shuttle, they don't show you those on TV. Echols the only one to do them, and he was one of the lower ones in both of those. So, the on-field stuff, you saw Echols, you saw Bryson Nesbitt. I thought Nesbitt helped himself once he got to the on-field stuff. I thought he caught the ball well. Really did a good job getting in and out of his breaks cleanly, didn't slip and fall. For Echols, I thought he moved pretty decent through the drills. It wasn't the best performance out of the linebackers, but I certainly think it was solid enough to at least have people look at him and think about giving him a camp invite. In terms of getting drafted, not sure that that's going to be in the cards for him. And so that's your look at the NFL Scouting Combine from a Tar Heel perspective. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Guys, make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Check out all the stuff that we have up there, all the coverage we have of the Combine this weekend. We'll have a stock report that'll come out, tell you who's trending up, who's trending down, whose stock stays the same as they leave Indy. And then, of course, any of the off-the-field stuff for Carolina going on right now, like Hard Knocks, like we told you. We'll have an article for the on-the-field stuff coming out. We'll talk about the most entertaining position battles that you guys need to keep an eye on or keep tabs on through the media, because as we said, and we didn't get to it here tonight, maybe that's something that we talk about as we go along in the spring. More than likely, Carolina is not going to have a spring game. They're not going to have a practice that's open to the public because they don't want to give anything away. Mainly, they don't want people to get looks at guys on the roster and start to tamper with them. So it means that, unfortunately, as fans, we are probably not going to get to see as much of this team as we want to here in the spring. But I do think that you will still get some decent media access that'll be able to tell you where these guys are at. So we'll tell you the 5 biggest battles that we think you need to watch for here as we go throughout spring camp. So check that out on the website. That'll be up later on this weekend. And then, of course, basketball side of things, we are in the home stretch right now. Carolina with 3 games left in the regular season. Tomorrow against Miami. Josh has a preview for you that'll be on the website. We've got the recap of that game. And then it'll be Virginia Tech. And, of course, to close out the regular season, the Duke game next Saturday, we will have you covered on that, and a special broadcast that we will be telling you more about coming up on the Four Corners podcast side of things there. You can listen to the Four Corners podcast wherever you get your podcast if you want to listen to every episode. And then, of course, tomorrow night's episode will be live streamed following Carolina's game against Miami, so don't miss out on that. Make sure that you're following the Heel Tough Blog Twitter page. When you do, turn on the notifications. That's the best way to make sure that you don't miss any of the stories, any additions to the podcast, anything like that. And also head over to the Facebook page, find it at just search Heel Tough Blog, and make sure that you give that Facebook page a like. We would greatly appreciate that. So once again, that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.